My name is Marcus, and what I'm about to tell you happened when I was 23 years old. I just moved into my first apartment after college. Nothing fancy. Just a small one-bedroom on the third floor of this old brick building downtown. The rent was cheap, which should have been my first red flag, but I was broke and desperate. I had student loans breathing down my neck and a job at a call centre that barely paid enough to cover groceries. The apartment came furnished, which was perfect since I owned basically nothing except a laptop and some clothes. The building had this weird vibe to it. The hallways were always dimly lit, and there was this musty smell that seemed to seep out of the walls themselves. But hey, it was mine, and for the first time in my life, I had actual independence. No roommates, no parents, just me and my little slice of freedom. I thought I'd finally made it. The first few weeks were great. I'd come home from work, heat up some ramen, and just enjoy the silence. There's something magical about having your own space, you know? Even if that space is a cramped apartment with paper-thin walls and a radiator that sounds like it's dying. I didn't care. This was my sanctuary. But then the dreams started. Now, I've always been a pretty heavy sleeper. In college, my roommate used to joke that a freight train could roll through our dorm and I wouldn't even stir. So when I started having these incredibly vivid nightmares, it caught me completely off guard. They weren't your typical stress dreams about showing up to work naked or forgetting to study for an exam. These were different, darker, more real than anything I'd ever experienced. The dreams always started the same way. I'd be lying in my bed, in my apartment, everything exactly as it should be, but something would feel off. The shadows would be too deep, the silence too complete. Then I'd hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps that would stop right outside my apartment. The footsteps would pause there for what felt like hours, and I'd lie frozen in my bed, too terrified to move. Then would come the knocking. 3 soft taps on my door. Then nothing. Then 3 more taps. This pattern would repeat over and over, and with each round of knocking, my heart would pound harder. In the dream, I'd want to get up and look through the peephole, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I'd be completely paralyzed, trapped in my own bed, while something waited patiently outside. The worst part was what happened next. After maybe 20 or 30 rounds of knocking, I'd hear my door slowly creak open, not violently, not like someone was breaking in. Just a gentle, almost polite opening, like whoever was out there had been invited inside. Then the footsteps would enter my apartment, moving through my living room, past my kitchen, down the short hallway toward my bedroom. I'd wake up every single time just as the footsteps reached my bedroom door. At first, I chalked it up to stress from the new job and the move. Everyone has weird dreams when their life changes dramatically, right? I figured my subconscious was just processing all the newness and uncertainty. But these dreams kept happening, night after night, always exactly the same sequence. The footsteps, the knocking, the door opening, the approach to my bedroom. It became so predictable that I'd actually start anticipating each part as it unfolded. After about 2 weeks of this nightly routine, I started dreading bedtime. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, knowing that as soon as I fell asleep, I'd be right back in that same terrifying scenario. I tried everything I could think of. I changed my diet, stopped drinking caffeine after noon, bought blackout curtains, even tried meditation apps. Nothing worked. The dreams persisted with clockwork precision. What really started to mess with my head was how realistic they felt. I mean, when I woke up, I could still smell the musty hallway scent from the dream. I could feel the exact texture of my sheets, the temperature of the air in my bedroom. Everything was so vivid and detailed that sometimes I'd have to check my front door to make sure it was still locked. I began researching sleep disorders online, thinking maybe I had developed some kind of parasomnia or sleep paralysis condition. I read about night terrors and lucid dreaming and all sorts of sleep-related phenomena, but nothing quite matched what I was experiencing. Most sleep disorders are random, chaotic. Mine followed the exact same script every night. About a month into living in the apartment, I decided to mention the dreams to my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She was this sweet elderly woman who'd lived in the building for over 20 years. I figured if anyone would know about weird building quirks or history, it would be her. I caught her checking her mail one afternoon and casually brought up the topic of sleep troubles. Her reaction was not what I expected. The moment I mentioned having strange dreams about footsteps and knocking, her entire demeanor changed. The friendly smile vanished from her face, and she got this really uncomfortable look in her eyes. She asked me which apartment I was living in, and when I told her 3B, she just nodded slowly like that explained everything. She told me that the previous tenant in 3B had been a guy named David. Mid-30s, worked as a security guard at one of the downtown office buildings. Quiet, kept to himself, always paid his rent on time. According to Mrs. Chen, David had lived in that apartment for almost 3 years without any problems. Then, about 6 months before I moved in, something changed. David started complaining to the building manager about noise in the hallways late at night. He said someone was walking up and down the corridor, stopping at his door and knocking repeatedly. The building manager investigated but never found anyone. Security cameras in the lobby showed no unauthorized visitors entering the building during the times David reported the disturbances. At first, everyone assumed David was just stressed from his job, or maybe having some kind of mental health episode. Night shift security work can mess with your sleep schedule and perception. But David insisted the knocking was real. He even started recording audio on his phone, trying to capture evidence. According to Mrs. Chen, David became obsessed with proving that someone was harassing him. The situation escalated over several months. David would call the police, demanding they investigate the mysterious visitor. He installed additional locks on his door and even set up a camera in his peephole. He stopped sleeping at normal hours, instead staying awake all night waiting to catch whoever was tormenting him. His work performance suffered, and he eventually lost his security job. Mrs. Chen said the last time she saw David, he looked terrible. Gaunt, exhausted, paranoid. He'd apparently told her that he finally figured out who had been knocking on his door every night. He said he'd seen them through his peephole camera, and it wasn't who he expected. But when Mrs. Chen asked him to explain, David just shook his head and said she wouldn't believe him. 3 days later, David was gone. Not moved out properly, not with a truck and boxes and forwarding address, just gone. His rent was paid through the end of the month, but his apartment was empty, no furniture, no personal belongings, nothing, like he'd simply vanished into thin air. The building manager had to hire a cleaning crew because David had left behind some kind of mess, though Mrs. Chen wasn't sure what kind of mess. The apartment stayed vacant for 4 months before I moved in. As Mrs. Chen finished telling me this story, I felt this cold dread settling in my stomach. The dreams I'd been having matched exactly what David had experienced, except I was experiencing it in my sleep instead of while awake. The same footsteps, the same knocking pattern, the same sense of someone waiting patiently outside. I asked Mrs. Chen if she thought there might be some logical explanation. Maybe something about the building's structure or heating system that could create those sounds. She just looked at me with this sad, knowing expression and suggested I might want to consider finding a different apartment. That night, I lay in bed dreading what I knew was coming. Sure enough, the dream unfolded exactly as it always did. The footsteps in the hallway, the methodical knocking, the slow opening of my door. But this time, something was different. This time, as the footsteps approached my bedroom, I managed to turn my head slightly toward the doorway. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway, was a figure I couldn't quite make out. Tall, unnaturally thin, wearing what looked like a long coat or robe. The figure stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, and even though I couldn't see its face, I had the overwhelming sensation that it was studying me. Then, for the first time in all these dreams, the figure spoke.